I would like to begin with acknowledgement, and I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the lands I stand on today, and to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I would also like to begin with a little bit of an introduction of what the Narrative Project is about. So the Australian Psychological Society has started this Narrative Project with the intent of capturing the voices of senior psychologists and record their stories for posterity. By building this library of experiences, we hope to bring richness and meaning to our discipline, while also gaining insight into the unique journey each psychologist undertook to be where they are today. In that sense, excited to introduce Kate Smith today, our guest. Kate, thank you for joining us and for taking part in this project.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, sorry to interrupt you.
No.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Look, I would like to start with the question of how many years have you been practicing as a psychologist?
For 46 years.
Wow, 46 years is also it's a considerable amount of time, and what that suggests is that you have had great commitment to the discipline of psychology, but also interest in the profession. What was your journey in becoming a psychologist?
Well, I started at university in music, loving music, and I had to do other units to complete my degree. So I did psychology as just a side unit. My mother was a clinical psychologist, so which there weren't many at that time, or when she was when she graduated. But she said that she thought psychology was a very easy first-year unit to pass. So I did that as a side unit. And after 3 years of doing music, I wasn't as interested in it as I thought I would be, and the only thing I could continue was psychology. So that's how I started. I completed a research-oriented master's preliminary at UWA, and my interest at the time was in reading. I did a research into good readers and those who are struggling to learn to read. And from there went to work in community welfare. I was employed as a research psychologist to look at foster care. On the day of my arrival, the head of the community welfare changed his mind, and I was sent out to a suburb called Balga, which as a clinical psychologist, when I had a 4-year research degree with no experience in counselling people or working with individuals apart from doing some child development assessment. Which was pretty scary. Balga at that time was Holmes West area, which was very troubled, a lot of very disadvantaged families. There were no other psychologists there, and supervision was extremely rare.
Yes.
Yeah. So it was, thrown in the deep end, really.
Interesting. I love your journey so far. What you're describing is definitely different time, very different time, and lots of interesting pathways that you've walked on to develop your skills and to really engage with the profession. And it definitely sounds that you were lucky to have some guidance, obviously, from your mom and other people, but at the same time, you were finding your feet as you were going through. Literally, you used the word deep end. Certainly, it exemplifies being thrown in the deep end.
I just worked there for 2 years, and then I applied to go into the master's master's course at UWA, but I hadn't done honours. I'd taken a different pathway for financial reasons, which wasn't a very good decision, and I ended up not getting into UWA master's and instead went to Murdoch and did a clinical and educational master's program there. But I felt at the time and afterwards very lucky that I had been at Murdoch at that time in Murdoch's university's development. Both universities then, I'm talking about my study and training pathways, were very behaviourally and research oriented, and sort of data-based evaluation of effectiveness was incredibly important. And after a theoretical year, we did 5 placements then for completion of masters, which I think is more than is probably common now, but it probably depends on universities.
Yeah. What year are we talking about now, Kate? When
I started at the end of 1980 in my placements.
I thought, I thought it will be somewhere around that. It sounds late 70s, early 80s, which is
finished my thesis because I had a child while I was doing my masters, which slowed me down a bit more than I thought it was going to. I finished the thesis in 1983. Yeah. Yes.
Without a doubt, to me, it sounds that your educational and training pathways show great adaptability on your part, from starting in music, going into social sciences, then changing hats professionally and working in the health sector, then going into the educational setting. Yeah. You've gone from research into clinical practice and then teaching. I mean, adapted all the time while also learning. Throughout your experiences, you would have met and worked alongside, as you just mentioned, many other professionals. Who inspired you? Who are your mentors?
Okay. Do you mind if I refer to my family first as my inspiration?
Absolutely, you go for it.
Okay. And my early life experiences. So my grandmother lived in a country town, and as a 7-year-old, she'd allow me to sit at the kitchen table while she counselled the troubled people from the town. And then my mother, as I said, was a clinical psychologist who worked in psychiatric settings and then with disadvantaged children and families. My father was a GP who worked with immigrants. I had lots of inspiring university lectures in later years, and I particularly like to mention David Leach and Jay Byrnbrower, who were the ones who, at Murdoch, who promoted the Coolbalup experience and the systemic interventions. In fact, at Murdoch University, we were not taught any counselling skills in terms of reflective listening or anything like that. If we wanted to do that, we had to go off and do it ourselves, which we did. We had a small group that used Gerald Egan as a reference.
Oh, how interesting. So the focus was purely on intervention, as in preventative work, rather than, doing that deep level therapy.
Yes, it was all Urban and Ford were our guide. It was a problem-solving reference.
Yes.
And problem-solving was what we were taught to look at. And over the years, of course, well, I should say that the parent effectiveness training, if you remember that at all, there was a book out in 1978 with some wonderful chapters on how to listen and how for parents to listen to their children. And I've used that as a guide for my whole career. I did one placement that I didn't mention at Disability Service Commission with a person called Jeff Jones, who introduced me to, sorry, I'll repeat that sentence, who goal attainment scaling.
Oh, yes.
Which I have found over the years a very useful evaluation tool. But he was also an incredibly respectful person of the people we worked with and alongside our colleagues, and inspiring that way. In Disability Services Commission, the head of Disability Services Commission was somebody called Hayden Lowe, also a clinical psychologist, who was inspirational in his encouragement of staff to innovate, and all these new programs were allowed, encouraged, funded, and many new programs were developed under his, leadership. And there was including a program in environmental management of very disabled young people in group homes, in making those group homes a lot more engaging the young people a lot more, so that they were not left to their own devices as much. But experimental, kind, trying to increase the enjoyment of life for people.
Yeah.
The development of adaptive behaviour assessments for severely disabled people, tools that were used for many, many years and very helpful in guiding the development of what we say, potential for people who might otherwise have been left to their own devices. And particularly a program when I was the manager of Mildred Creek Services for children with autism. And we developed a program for very behaviourally troubled young people. And there were two staff there who I'd like to acknowledge, Lois Danks and Diana Peters, who were the group workers who worked and who developed that program, and they're absolutely marvellous and always kind and positive. I worked with Tiffany Rochester, who is a clinical psychologist who's developed a program for parents who've just separated to avoid the court system. She's very inspirational. I was her supervisor, but she has become my guider in this area since I've been working in private practice. And Phil Narkle, Aboriginal team leader, who I worked with a program working with mainly Aboriginal families with children who were offenders, and again trying to engage the families in increasing their agency in guiding their children. Lastly, I'm working with a colleague, Juliette Ferrari, who's in the room next to me in a private practice, and she's very knowledgeable in psychiatric and clinical area, and she's been a mentor for me in that area. So
it sounds like you've been so fortunate, Kate, to actually be guided and mentored by members of your family, as you've identified your grandmother, your mother, your father, and then the other professionals, like your teachers or academics you worked and learned alongside through your development as a professional. I think I would like you to try and tap into your young mind self, and as an early career psychologist, and what would you tell your early career self?
Well, I would say to myself, you're going to love this career.
Indeed.
And find getting to know people fascinating, heartwarming, and really relevant to how you live all aspects of your life. Despite all the frustrations and the angst and the nights lying awake at 3 o'clock in the morning arguing with people, it's still a marvellous career from my perspective. The intimate connection that you have with people so frequently is an absolute privilege. So that is what I would say to myself.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love it. There is so much that comes from reflection, from insight, and most of all from experience. So what is one lesson you've learned and would like to pass on to the future generation of psychologists?
There are so many things, I think, but I remember early on being very critical of mothers who I didn't think were parenting very well. And I suppose over time I have become more and more aware that people are doing the best that they can with the capacities that they have and with their life experiences, and that we must apply, even with families and parents, the very same principles that we want to apply with children in terms of encouragement, connection, respect, and must not come from a position of superiority. We need to be humble, work in collaboration, disclose information at times that is helpful. Yes,
that reminds me of Carl Jung's thoughts on something very similar. It says, know all your theories, master all your techniques, but as you touch a human soul, be just another human soul. And it's exactly that you speak of for me.
That sounds very, very much in agreement with what I'm saying.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Through experience, we learn to trust our knowledge and expertise, and allowing that understanding to guide and direct our interactions. That is when we engage in a therapeutic work masterfully, I would say. So everything you describe shows me and demonstrates exactly that. It's learning along the way how to relax into the role of being a psychologist and just allow the connection to guide you and use that humanity to inform and actually set the tone for that interaction, professional and client, which is beautiful. I think that is beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Now,
yes.
My last question to you, Kate, is a big question and requires a future lens, if you like. What are your hopes for the future of psychology?
I would really like to see that we are more engaged in systemic change. I believe that we have, there's been a number of influences, but we're very much focusing on individual one-on-one work, I think. And I think I would like to see us focus much more on the preventative end of things. So I'd like to see that we have some universal psychological services for families before they have children, and at the point they have children, and in early childhood centres and early education. Of course, it's very, very important that we have the individual one-on-one therapy, which I enjoy immensely, and I think is so helpful. But I'd like to see more at the other end. I think in the earlier years, I think in school settings, the school psychologists have, the caseloads are huge, and to be able to actually engage with, somehow we need to do something that is more on a group basis as well. And I am distressed at some of the NDIS in particular. It's marvellous for some people who are getting services they would never have got before, but I think it's very much encouraged people to work in silos individually. I think there's a lot less team collaboration. I would like to see more government services where young psychologists can work in teams, where they are encouraged, they can share ideas, they can be involved in research and development, and build up their confidence and their ideas about systemic change before they are placed in almost exclusively one-to-one counselling.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
Beautifully said. Kate, thank you. Thank you so much for your time today and for describing your amazing journey. And thank you for sharing your thoughts on psychology and your wishes or hopes.